Last October, my friend Scott and I traveled from the United States to Cuba. We weren't smuggled in, we didn't fly through Mexico or any other country, we flew directly there, legally. I'm sure you're here to find out exactly how to do that yourself. Just a note before we start, since we traveled to Cuba, Fidel Castro's passed away and Donald Trump has become president of the United States. The information in this video is accurate now, but I suspect that the laws and processes and things like that are going to change in the very near future. So just be aware. First, let's talk about how to get to Cuba. The obvious thing is to just fly there, but there still aren't a ton of flights directly to Cuba from the United States. The cities with the most amount of flights are Miami/Fort Lauderdale and New York City. But there are still flights coming out of Los Angeles, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Chicago, Orlando, and a bunch of others. So my best advice would be just to check flight aggregation sites like Kayak, Skyscanner, Google Flights, or Cheapo Air. Depending on where you live in the United States, it still may be cheaper to fly through Mexico. And don't limit yourself to just flying into Havana. Cuba is huge, and there's tons to see in other places. When we flew to Cuba, flying to Havana was around $700 round trip, but flying to Cienfuegos, which is only about 4 hours east of Havana, was $200 round trip. And the bus in between the two cities was only about $20 each way. Now that you know how you're going to get there, let's talk about the most important and confusing part of traveling to Cuba as an American. No, it is still not legal to travel to Cuba as a tourist. Up until a few years ago, you had to apply to the US government to get permission to travel to Cuba. Not too long ago, the Obama administration made some changes so that criteria still is in effect, but you don't have to apply for permission with the US government anymore. You just fit into that criteria and you go. So, what is the criteria? Well, you must fit into one of 12 predetermined categories or reasons for travel. My reason for travel was journalism. I wanted to capture Cuba and its people to share with you and this YouTube channel. No, I cannot give you any recommendations on which category to use to travel there. You'll have to do that on your own, so don't ask in the comments. But I will leave a link below to a website that contains all 12 categories and details about each, so you can make sure that you check them out and make the determination on which one best fits you, if any. Once you've chosen a category that accurately describes and fits your reason for travel to Cuba, there's nothing else you have to do with the US government. You're done. But you do have to do one other thing, and that is get a travel visa from the Cuban government. You can either get this ahead of time from places online, and this costs about $80, or at least it did when I went, or you can buy it at the airport for about $100. As far as I know, the only airport that offers this service is Miami International Airport. So if you're not flying through there, make sure you buy it ahead of time. And again, links in the description for a website where you can do that. When we arrived in Cuba, I was asked what I did for a living, why I was in Cuba, and where I was staying. So it is very highly recommended that you arrange for your accommodations for at least your first night before you travel. And thanks to the increased availability of the internet and Airbnb, finding a great place to stay in Cuba is easier than ever. Of course, you can stay in a hotel, but why do that when you can spend a lot less money to stay in an apartment run by a local who can give you advice and recommendations on your stay? These places are called casas, and the easiest way to find them right now is through Airbnb. Alright, you've gotten to Cuba legally, and you found a place to stay while you're there. But how do you get around once you're in Cuba? Well, if you're staying in one city, I would recommend just walking everywhere. It's the best and easiest way to see a city and experience everything that it has to offer. If you need to travel across the city or get someplace quickly, a cab is your best option. Cabs in Cuba are relatively cheap, especially compared to those here in New York City and other big cities in the United States. But be warned, they do charge foreigners more to use the cabs. Before you get in, just tell the cab driver where you want to go and ask them how much it's going to be. If it seems like it's going to be too much, say so. In Cuba, cab prices are negotiable. If you want to travel from city to city in Cuba, the easiest option is to just take a bus. The most popular intercity bus for foreigners is called Viazul. We got from Trinidad to Havana, a 4-hour journey, for only $20 on the Viazul bus. The great thing is, you can buy these tickets ahead of time online before you even get to Cuba. But if your schedule's not that rigid, you can also buy them at the bus station. Just be warned, it is a popular bus and the tickets sometimes do sell out. If you want to know how to get to the nearest bus station in your city, just ask your casa owner. I'm sure they'd be very glad to tell you how to get there. Now, let's talk about the second most important thing when traveling to Cuba: money. As of right now, American credit and debit cards do not work in Cuba. There are banks and there are ATMs, but if you're using an American card, it just won't work. MasterCard and Discover promise that very soon your American cards will work in Cuba, but as of right now, they don't. So, you're going to need to plan ahead of time. You're going to have to calculate how much you think you're going to spend every day. Take that much, and then add a little bit more. For example, I took about $100 worth of money for each day. You could easily spend less, and you could easily spend more. That's up to how you travel. As of right now, I don't think any currency exchange counters in the US will convert US dollars to Cuban money. But you can take your money with you, and when you arrive in Cuba, there will be an exchange counter in the airport. But again, be warned, if you're converting from US dollars to Cuban money, they do charge you a little bit extra because you're American. So it's advised, depending on the exchange rate, to convert your US dollars to euros in the United States and then convert your euros to Cuban money when you arrive. And just to make things a little bit more confusing, there are two Cuban currencies. The first one is the Cuban peso, which is used by people who live in Cuba, Cuban citizens. And this money has faces of famous Cuban people throughout history. And then you have the Cuban convertible peso, or CUC for short, CUC. And this is meant to be used by foreigners. You can tell this because there are monuments on the dollar bills. The great thing is that the CUC is normally aligned with the US dollar. So 1 CUC equals 1 US dollar. So it's easy to budget while you're there. All right, so you've had an awesome time in Cuba, and now you're ready to head home. What can you bring back with you? The short answer is anything you'd normally be able to bring back to the United States from any other country. The restrictions on alcohol and tobacco, in this case, rum and cigars, are the same traveling from Cuba as they are from any other country, like Canada. Liquids can't be brought back through the US airports. So if you're gonna be buying rum, make sure to check it in your bag or buy it in the duty-free shop in the airport. Also, if you're gonna buy cigars or any other souvenirs from Cuba, they will charge you an extra tax for taking it out of the country in the Cuban airport. So keep some extra money on hand when you're leaving and be prepared for that. When you arrive back in the United States, you shouldn't have any trouble. When I came back from Cuba, I was asked the exact same questions as when I came back from Hong Kong or Europe earlier in the year. Just be truthful with them, and you should breeze right through security. Congrats! You just took an amazing trip to Cuba, completely legally. Now, go brag to your friends about it. And if they want to travel there themselves, make sure to send them this video so they know how. You, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up to this video if you felt that it helped you out. And if you want to get some ideas on what you can do in Cuba, or are just curious what I did while I was there, make sure to check out this playlist here. Thank you again for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Safe travels, and adios.